So that's the majority. And most of those people have lost money at this point because you can look at a chart. And so I don't like that part, but that is, that's probably the majority. Inside of it is everything from like super hardcore libertarian ideology to honestly what you would think would be the opposite politically, like a very sort of progressive, up with people, banking system sucks kind of a thing. That then I think gets tied up into Bitcoin.
And then like also like in the New York Times profile of you, it talks about how you visited one of these Bitcoin mining facilities in Texas. Was it like the Windstone US? Like what was that like? I mean, like what like I mean, I can sort of like imagine it in my head, like it's just like a warehouse of like these huge like just hard drives whirring all the time that are liquidly cooled. But like, which is, can you just like describe what one of those facilities is like?
It was truly surreal. So I grew up in Austin, where South by Southwest takes place. And when David, the reporter who wanted to do a piece on me, suggested coming down, I said, "Yeah, we're thinking about going to a crypto mine, and you could come." And so we drove an hour outside of Austin to a tiny little town called Rockdale, Texas, which honestly, even though it's an hour and a half from Austin, I had never been to. It is a very small town, and the Windstone facility has taken over what used to be an Alcoa aluminum smelting plant, which I believe provided the jobs back when we used to have aluminum smelting in this country, or at least there. And it's on 33,000 acres that have now been turned over to this mining facility. And the main advantage of the mining facility is that because it was a plant, it is connected to the power grid at a really significant. There's a big what do you call it, a transformer or whatever. There's a huge it can handle a ton of electricity. And so they're running this massive operation where you go in and it is truly astounding. I mean, you look up, these are sort of football field size or even longer warehouses running endless machines. And you stepped into one, so there is a cooling part on one side, but I was in another room, which was the original sort of technology. I guess they hadn't developed the cooling yet. And it's probably about 30, 40 feet in the air, machines everywhere. And it's at the top, it's open so the air can escape, but it's purposefully not ventilated in the sense that there's nothing pushing the air through necessarily. Actually want it to escape up and out for some reason I don't quite understand. So it's really hot. It's like it was 105 on a pretty kind of mild day for March in Texas, probably 70 degrees maybe. And the guy that was showing us around, who's quoted in the article, said it gets up to 125 in the summer. And what you hear is this like it's like a million digital wasps or something, billions of little zzz, this sort of low hum. It's really quite. It was profound. It was disturbing to me in the sense that, from my perspective, with a background in economics, because it's not producing any value overall. Because in economics, this stuff is thought of as zero sum. Before you add in the electrical component, you're just gambling, right? It's like what you're talking about, the Ponzi. It's like some people are going to win, some people are going to lose, but it's just gambling. You're not creating a product, you're not creating a revenue stream based off of that product, right? Like, say what you will about Apple or Amazon or whatever, but like they provide a good or a service, and like you can monetize that, you can evaluate that. The price can go up and down, but you can sort of have a sense of what that might be worth
You
compared
can
to
you
other
can you can
things.
hold it in your hand, like you can see that the thing that was like produced or
In
that
some
you're
senses,
interacting with
yeah.
or utilizing in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And there's none of that. It's just code, right? It's just code that exists on a blockchain somewhere, and they're running enormous amounts of electrical energy are being used. It is the equivalent of a medium-sized country overall. The overall Bitcoin electrical usage is like the equivalent of, I forget which country it
I
is
think I
now.
think I think France, I think, was the one that like a nation the size of France, like the equivalent amount of electricity is being used for now all the Bitcoin mining in the world, and also, but it is going up like exponentially.
Yes. Well, by design, the hash rate
Yeah.
keeps going up by design. It's an interesting, we're trying to, this whole thing was started by, well, we don't know who it was started by. It was started by someone calling, or some people calling themselves Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008, when this white paper was sort of dumped on the world. And it's an interesting thing to read. It's very short, but it's really interesting that this thing that kind of came out of nowhere and that no one has, with real evidence, proved that they are the originator of. There's some guy who's claiming he is, but he seems like a piece of work, like most people in crypto. It's really interesting that they've created this massive thing that's like sort of, using up the electrical equivalent of France, and was supposedly worth $3 trillion, and no one wants to take credit for it. It's quite a mystery. I'm having a lot of fun trying to get to the bottom of it, because economically it's just a real head scratcher. It doesn't make much more sense than sort of the tulip bulb phase of the 16th century or whatever.
But just in your description of this like giant facility, it's like 120 degrees on a hot day, running this like directly hooked up to the power grid, running an enormous amount of electricity to run these like essentially computers that are solving math problems. The detail about how it was like, it's in a town outside of Austin, and the facility itself is in a former factory, and like this buzz, this like you described it, a wasp like buzz. It's like, is that the sound of like just the apocalypse happening? I mean, like, what is this like? The feeling of like, of a former factory, like which what you should think of as like connected to the economy, but that like what was once a factory that I don't know how provided how many jobs for the people and community, or no matter what they built, that was like contributing to something of value to society. It's just like this surreal image of like a former factory now just like taking probably more electricity to produce kind of an invisible speculative asset.
Yeah, it is. It was like the financial apocalypse, or sort of capitalism reaching its endpoint, right? It was like we're just running machines and burning energy to gamble on. There's no, it doesn't do anything except things that, you couldn't do legally. Um, so for sometimes for better or worse, right? Sometimes to send cross-border payments, like I acknowledge that argument. That's a tiny percentage of what's being used here. And so it's like, really, this is the best we can do. This is our way of sort of. It was dystopic. I mean, and sad to me, because the main argument that the gentleman who was showing us around, who was running the facility, was making was jobs. He was saying we're bringing in jobs, and there were people working there, and you could see them. And I want people to have jobs, man. I think jobs are good. Like, I like that. I mean, everyone hates their job, but they should have one. But we have to have something. It just brought to me, honestly, what it brought to mind was the old Keynes line. Keynes had the line of like, at this, in times of crisis, just literally pay people to dig holes in the ground and then fill them back up again. I was like, that would be better than this. That would be use less electricity. Give them a shovel and tell them, yeah, you got to do it. By the way, take your time. There's no rush, because you're just going to fill it back up. Um, but we have to find more productive uses for this incredible potential that we have in this country. I think we've just really lost our way. I am getting really mad at. I believe that capitalism is eating our democracy. I believe that it has bought off both parties to some extent. And we see that in the inability to do anything proactive, seemingly, that could possibly hurt what is termed innovation, but is really sort of a redistribution from